Today's show is sponsored by the multiorgasmicmama.com. If lack of confidence, low libido, or guilt and shame around your sexuality are the cause of your bedroom woes, the hot wild sex you never have anymore, or the transition into motherhood that sucked your libido dry, let me help you get your mojo and magnetic feminine spark back. Magic, miracles, total self-love, and multi-orgasmic bliss included. See you at themultiorgasmicmama.com. Welcome, Melanie.
Thank you, Lacey. I'm so excited to be here.
Yeah, I know. This is going to be a fun, juicy interview here, all about the vagus nerve and pleasure and sex. Interesting stuff.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so go ahead and tell me a little bit about yourself. What do you do in the world? What is your work all about?
Well, the easy answer is that I'm a physical therapist.
Yeah.
The way my work has, my clinical expertise is in treating the vagus nerve as a pinched nerve. And your vagus nerve, we'll get into this more, I think, a little bit later, but it's your big stress and pleasure mediating pathway. And as a physical therapist, it's always been interesting to me in terms of mediating inflammation and helping people get out of their pain. Your vagus nerve does tons and tons of things in your body. But where I've really distilled everything to is becoming I would call myself the queen of alignment. And that we have three major ways that we align. And one is through our physical bodies. We also align electromagnetically. We are electromagnetic fields that are generated by our vagus nerves, synchronized with the electromagnetic field of the earth. And so we have this bigger electromagnetic alignment. And then I also work a lot with archetype in the body and look at mythology as a mode of transmitting scientific information. And so I do what I'm calling story prescription. So I match particular myths with particular parts of the anatomy to help you uncover the spiritual underpinnings of your physical dysfunction and also resolve any distortions in that energetic imprint, because I think that's literally the way the cosmos is coded into you.
Yeah. So you are so much more than a physical therapist.
Yes. And I treat people online and I treat people in person. So I have a very different skill set than a traditional physical therapist does.
Yeah. Which is what I love, because I love that you have this physical, biological anatomy type skill set that you can bring to the table, but you also really understand the energy body and how that plays into things so much. And I think it's just such a beautiful intertwining of skills that you have. It's so unique.
Thank you. I have so much fun with it. My background is in treating complicated chronic pain patients and others that just haven't found the answers to what they were looking for in terms of healing their physical body. And so a lot of this has evolved out of learning from their bodies and seeing these, evaluating people head to toe and seeing these bigger patterns that happen with us. And it gives me so much joy to help people with the puzzles that we all are and to figure that out. I get such a rush from all of it. And really, I think that we often make healing way too hard. And I'm all about finding the shortest path to our highest potential.
Yeah. Hell yeah. I'm all about healing and pleasure.
Yeah.
Healing with pleasure.
Well, I think we forget, we know that scientifically that we inherit the traumas of our ancestors, but we totally forget, we inherit our ability to experience pleasure that way too. And we're I know you and I have talked about this before, but we're such a trauma-focused society, and not that dealing with that isn't important. And I understand the evidence and I come from a lot of training in that, I get it, but I think that we've got to start moving out of this sort of trauma-based mindset and really give it a bigger place to go into more pleasure.
Yeah. Pleasure and empowerment. Mm-hmm.
And optimizing performance. The vagus nerve is when an athlete, for example, is in the zone and has a really amazing performance, that is all vagus nerve. That's measurable in your vagus nerve. Your vagus nerve is what gets you in the zone. So, even just wanting to be a better public speaker, a better actor, a better singer, a better, person, whatever you're doing in your job, getting in the zone, you can use vagus nerve techniques to improve that.
Yeah, and a better lover, which we'll get
and
to.
a better lover, absolutely. Yeah, because certainly that's where we all really want to be in the zone, is when we're a better lover, when we're making love.
Yeah, for sure.
That's
Okay.
definitely.
Well, tell me a little bit about how you went from being a physical therapist and doing very just clinical work to how it relates to sexuality and pleasure, because this is a pretty new thing for you, right?
It is. I will say that in what I discovered over the years in treating people is that, like, I'd have it, like, especially women would come to me with back pain. And so I'd see them for a visit, and then they'd come back a couple weeks later, maybe for a second visit, and they would tell me, they're like, what did you do? Because I've had pain with intercourse for the last 8 or 9 years since my child was born or whatever, and now it doesn't hurt anymore. Or they would say, like, my sex drive is really starting to, got juiced up after last time, or things, I feel different in my body, and what is that? And so it was sort of, like I said, it's just been kind of a happy side effect, but I'm definitely moving into, as you move into helping people with performance, you also move into helping people with, experience more pleasure in your bodies. And your vagus nerve is your big pleasure pathway across the board.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I think that's something that's not, that's only been tapped into a little bit scientifically. It's more known as like your rest and digest and just kind of feel good. But because the vagus nerve in women innervates cervix and clitoris, we know that it's tied deeply into pleasure.
For sure. And you're like on the leading edge of this information getting out to the public and even research wise, right?
Yeah. Well, I am, as far as I know, there's no one on a big scale that's really talking about or looking at the vagus nerve as a pinched nerve, that it can get compressed at different points in your body. Polyvagal theory is becoming more popular, and that's maybe lives a little more heavily in the psychotherapy world, and there's techniques that they're using that are great with all of that. But as a physical therapist, I'm all about the mechanics of the body. And and for me, there's 6 major points that your vagus nerve can get compressed in the body. And so I have a whole system of evaluating that and treating that to enhance function overall. And one of the really beautiful things about the vagus nerve is it uses the same neurotransmitter that your muscles do. So you get these really beautiful musculoskeletal shifts when you address vagus nerve compression.
So what does that mean to people without a background like yours?
Like that, yeah. So what it means, like, if you have, say, tight hip flexors, or even pelvic floor dysfunction, maybe, that you're maybe having some pelvic pain, or even incontinence and different things like that where your pelvic floor is, the muscles maybe aren't working, they're either too tight or too loose, that you could, if your vagus nerve is compressed at the base of your skull, that decompressing it at the base of your skull can completely shift your pelvic mechanics and can shift the tone of those muscles. It can get the ones that are tight to lighten up and the ones that are loose to engage a little bit better, and just get you, give you the opportunity to reprogram your body in a way that you couldn't because you're stuck in essentially a bad pattern, or a mechanical pattern that's not working for you.
Okay. So that makes sense to me, because like most women, I find we have an inability to relax our pelvic floor enough to have a really amazing orgasm. When I'm working with women, it's basically teaching them how to relax their pelvic floor. And I do that with the jade egg work, right? But like, there's a bunch of people out there that are like, oh, you want a tight pelvic floor, you want a tight pussy and all this. And I'm just like, no, you don't. So do you think that this work, like, the compressed vagus nerve, if you decompress it at different points in the body, then it helps the muscles of the pelvic floor to be able to loosen up. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, absolutely. It'll help normalize it in whichever direction it needs to go. I found that that it works both ways.
So interesting. Wow. Okay. Well, we're gonna dive deeper into this. I am so curious as well about how in the world this nerve can potentially allow you to have a throat orgasm, because honestly, I had never even heard of them until I did sexuality training and all of that. And even when I had heard about it, I was like, oh yeah, that's crazy. Like nobody has that. And then I experienced it and I was like, okay, I proved myself wrong there. But it doesn't make any sense to me about like how that's even possible to have an orgasm from your throat. But I know it has something to do with your work. So if you could just like give us an idea of how that might be possible.
Absolutely. Well, and I think this may have been when I first reached out to you because you posted about it. And I was like, oh, that makes so much sense to me physiologically. So, so correct me if I'm wrong, but you experienced it really through stimulation on the roof of your mouth, on your hard palate, correct?
Correct. Yeah. So
okay.
Someone was using their finger at the roof of my mouth and just massaging that part of the mouth.
So we all have a bone at the center of our skull. It sits kind of behind the nose and below your temples. And it's called your vomer, VOMER. And your vomer bone can get like from just even, it doesn't have to be major head trauma, but from, especially if you've had a concussion or been a soccer player or were a toe walker when you were a child, I will tell you, you probably have some amount of vomer dysfunction. And it's not so much directly connected to there's not like the vagus nerve doesn't sit by the vomer bone, but what happens is your vomer bone can get stuck low, basically. So if you imagine you get a bump on the head and it gets shoved down. And it should have this nice mobility where it goes up towards the top of your head and, and comes down towards your palate a little bit. And so, when you evaluate it, or when I evaluate it, it's a little, I see if it can go both directions and if it's got equal excursion. But what I find is that when their vomer is dysfunction, they are often in what I call vagus nerve lockdown. Like they've just got their whole system is dysfunctional. And that's even measurable at their toes. Like my biomechanical test for their toes will be abnormal. And so, and when you put the vomer back in the correct position, it literally will unlock the whole thing. It'll change people's hip flexibility and range of motion and get their pelvic floors moving again. And it affects the entire system. So it made complete sense to me because of its influence on the vagus nerve that you could have an orgasm through the roof of your mouth too, because I use a technique in the same part of the mouth to get people to open up people's vagus nerves and get, so that I don't do the sex coaching like you do, but I give them, the space to at least, to physically open up in other, to be able to get to that point and get all of those other kind of things out of the way. And I think if I was going to, my working theory on this is that it has to do with our embryonic layers and how things come together too, why that works. And I know you do a lot of inner child work and I do it too. And I have an energy system for treating embryonic layers too. So when you talk about treating the inner child, there's lots of ways to approach that too. But so did that make sense so when it gets stuck down, it just locks your whole system's locked. And, and you end up, you can imagine that your vomer being stuck down is kind of like being curled up in a fetal position, and like if you want to be more open and visible and powerful, you're not going to lay down in a fetal position.
Yeah. And so the nerve does have a concentrated amount, like it's a huge nerve. If you look at
Absolutely. Yeah.
it goes in many different parts of your body, but so there's like some sort of concentration at the roof of your mouth of those nerve endings that somehow pick up, and they also are, directly traveling to your clitoris as well.
No, you're absolutely getting it. I guess as a PT, I see it more your vagus nerve does innervate the lining of your throat too. So there could be a skin aspect of the stimulation also.
Mhm.
But I think a lot of what it does, mechanically, it just gets it's like putting your brain back in the right place. And when I learned this Vomer technique, like at least 20 years ago at a continuing education course that I took at Michigan State University's College of Osteopathic Medicine, the osteopathic dentist that taught that technique said, he's like, if you can change the Vomer, you can change anything. Like you like made a big deal about how amazingly transformative this is on people's lives. And I've just seen it over and over and over in a variety of different situations, whether it's a pelvic health issue or a TMJ issue, or even suicide ideation, like really mental health as well.
That's crazy.
It is. It's totally crazy. It's like, it's my favorite thing when somebody comes in with Vomer dysfunction, because I know it's just going to, and I always make a point after I've, when I've done their evaluation, to show them where things are, where the limitations are and where they're dysfunctional. And so then we do the Vomer technique, and then I'll go reassess. And it's just, it surprises me every time, even though I've seen it a million times, that it never gets old to see it change like that.
Yeah. And one thing that I love about in your bio, you put that you're a PT that can help people where no one else has been able to help them before. And that's huge, because I have had potential clients that have come to me, and some, current clients that have come to me who experience vaginismus, vulvodynia, spinal cord injuries, paraplegics even, and they have questions like, can I experience an orgasm as after a spinal cord injury? They don't know that it can even be possible. So I'm curious, like, how does this work play out for people that have serious problems like this, and where the rest of the medical community may have been like, there's no hope, or like, I can't help you?
Well, I think there's well, I have a few answers for that. One, there is actual research that shows that women with complete spinal cord injuries can achieve orgasm with vagus nerve stimulation. Mm-hmm. And so, like my knee-jerk reaction to that is like, wow, if they're able to experience orgasm, then nobody else has an excuse not to experience an orgasm. Like what's the potential? Like who, and because your vagus nerve sits outside of your spinal cord, that makes, it makes sense that possibility is, that's there for them. I think that where the medical system really struggles is that it's also hyper specialized and focused, that nobody's really able to look at the person as a whole.
Mm-hmm. For sure.
And even, and the psychotherapists are probably a little bit better at that than some, that's, they're looking at the overall mindset. But just because you resolve something in your mind doesn't mean that your body, your body keeps the score. Is sort of how it goes, that, it still will live in your body. And I say we all have a physical expression of our internal narrative. Mm-hmm. And an internal expression of our physical narrative. It goes both ways. And so a certain amount of people that have had, that aren't getting better, are really just biomechanical train wrecks, that they just have so much dysfunction in multiple joints that they have no shock absorption left in their system. Mm-hmm. And so by giving them just a modicum of shock absorption back can make a huge difference on your ability to experience pleasure. If you imagine that you're, without shock absorption, you're kind of walking through life like Godzilla, or your stomach, that there's just like, it's very heavy and hard on the body to do that. And that's going to limit the amount of pleasure that's possible. And that when you, and the second part of that is that women, we've all been programmed for so long to play small.
Mm-hmm.
And really standing in our power and our energy and in our gorgeousness and opulence and amazingness is, and in that full electromagnetic alignment, that we're literally fractals of the earth. And to kind of, I help people really connect to that bigger sense of themselves, and quite literally to the bigger cosmos, and how that's coded into them. What I find is that there are critical angles in the body that mimic angles of the Earth's precessional cycle. And if those angles are not right, you are less likely to feel well. Mm. And then the third part of it is the story that we've told ourselves, or the story that's even more, maybe more deeply programmed into us. And this is where I bring in mythology from many different cultures, but the easiest way to start to understand it is through Western astrology. So we know that the ancient people communicated science through story, because the myth of Isis and Osiris, which is an ancient Egyptian myth, has the numbers of the Earth's precessional cycle in it. And there are other major myths from other cultures with the same numbers. So they communicated the cosmology through story. Mm-hmm. And in the ventricles in your brain that make cerebral spinal fluid look just like the ram's horns for Aries. And in astrology, Aries rules the head. And the way your hyoid bone on your sits on top of your larynx and your throat looks just like the symbol for Taurus, and Taurus rules the throat. And your aortic arch is the same shape as the symbol for Leo, and Leo rules the heart. Scorpio rules the reproductive system. And a woman's reproductive system looks very much like a scorpion, where the vagina is the tail and the ovaries would be the claws.
I never thought of that.
And Scorpio is also the only sign that has 3 archetypes through it. It also has the snake, which is the male phallus, and then the phoenix. It's where we create from, where we rise from, rises from the ashes. And it doesn't matter whether you're making love or babies or business or art. All creation comes from your pelvis. It comes from your second chakra, and so you have to have a juicy second chakra just to manifest, really.
For sure. I know that one. That's pretty much all of my work in a nutshell, is helping women wake up their sensual sexual energy of the sacral chakra. And also, obviously, inner child work and emotional empowerment is such a big part of sacral work as well.
It really is. And so I have two stories on that. So just on a very practical level, so like we all energetically literally have a scorpion that's living in our pelvises.
Right.
And I treated, this is where I use more of my intuitive skills, but I treated one of my colleagues who was having some pelvic pain. She had a uterine ablation, and she especially still had pain when she flexed her right hip up. And so I evaluated her, and she's a very conventional physical therapist. My work is out there, but we're friends. And so what I saw when I treated her was that her scorpion tail was curled up to the right. So I put her scorpion tail back in place, and then she could flex up her right leg without pain, which then also gave her better sexual function, because she was able to pull her leg, her leg up during sex.
Wow. So interesting.
So there's lots of, right. So that's one of the really fun ways I use the way archetype lives in the body. In terms of personal power, the myth of Pluto and Persephone, I think, is one of the least understood, or there are some real gems in it, because Pluto and Persephone had equal co-rulership in the underworld. And they were faithful to each other. And in none of the renditions of the myth does it ever indicate that Persephone was unhappy in the underworld. She came up for the spring and summer for her mother. So, and we've all had our underworlds really shamed. You know, a lot of our religions have a very dark and demonizing view of that. But in ancient Egyptian culture, the underworld was where all life came from. It was where gold and gems and the harvest came from. And I just think that's such a beautiful perspective. And my name literally means clad in black. So I have this very lovely relationship with the underworld that is not the same, you know, the same. And so I do a lot of helping people reprogram and recontextualize kind of what that is, to really be able to pull, you know, from deep within ourselves and all of that incredible wisdom that we're programmed with.
Yeah, I will totally second the power and epicness of underworld and our darkness. People that have listened to my podcast or have taken my Ignite Your Desire masterclass, you've probably heard me say it, but fuck your love and light. Fuck it. Fuck all your love and light and positive vibes only, because you are denying such a powerful part of you if that's the only part of you. If your lightness and your positivity is the only part of you that you can honor, you are not having a complete human experience.
Absolutely.
You're just not.
Absolutely.
You're not honoring all parts of you. And when you can't honor, accept, and love all parts of you, well, you're not experiencing all that you can be experiencing, and you're not experiencing all the pleasure that is available to you, because there is beauty and darkness. There is power and darkness. And not being afraid to go there is such a sign of personal strength that, you know, like, you trust yourself. You trust
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. And it can be really beautiful. It doesn't have to, like, I don't perceive darkness doesn't, you know, I just don't perceive it as a negative thing. It's just sort of the yin yang of,
right.
of it all.
Yeah, and yin yang is very Taoist, and I come from a very Taoist and tantric perspective of darkness and underworld. That in tantra, it's more of like, well, nothing's inherently good or bad because there's consciousness in everything. So of course we would honor our darkness and the underworld parts of us, and, you know, just as much as we would the light and the good stuff. So yeah, totally.
Absolutely.
Okay, well, how does trauma gets stored in the vagus nerve?
So trauma dials down the vagus nerve, basically, because when we get traumatized, we get a sympathetic response, like a fight and flight response. And so that's your vagus nerve is the balancing point, or the opposite of your fight and flight system.
Really?
And so when you go into fight and flight, your vagus nerve then gets dialed down. And a lot of people live in this state. You know, this is a state that was really only meant for moments like the saber-toothed tigers chasing us and whatnot, you know, but like, we have a lot of people now, like, we live in these high sympathetic states. And trauma, it's well established that trauma always affects the voice and the breath. And your vocal cords and your diaphragm are horizontal muscles, and they're horizontally oriented in the body.
Okay.
And so this is where the vagus nerve gets compressed, is where you have horizontal structures. And then it limits your rotation. Like, nobody experiences stress or trauma and has really great arm swing when they walk. We all freeze up, you know, we stop rotating.
Wow.
And then I have a more sort of so then we stop literally moving with the universe.
Yeah.
Or we're resisting our alignment with the cosmos on a much bigger scale because we've given up our rotation.
Mm-hmm. That makes total sense to me. And so if you've experienced sexual trauma or something, so how would that pan out in like shutting down desire and orgasmic function?
Oh, absolutely. Well, your pelvic floor is a horizontal set of muscles
Yeah.
too. So you're going to, right. So it's going to shut down that. And certainly trauma, in the midst of trauma, people will lose bowel and bladder control too at times. But, and absolutely with sexual abuse, other sexual trauma, that it's going to shut down your pelvic floor. And you'll find that these people actually, when you measure their range of motion, their hips are often very limited in their ability to come out to the side because they've locked that down in such a protective way. And our bodies are always doing the thing that makes the most sense. And I think we really have to honor that whatever dysfunction you have going on, your body's doing the smartest thing that it knows how to do. And to really appreciate the support that it gives you to get through a really challenging time, but you don't have to stay in that state. And I think trauma, when people can get to the point where they can see their trauma as an initiation into something bigger, I think it's, trauma can be a really big initiation and invitation into doing something bigger with your life than you've ever imagined.
Yeah.
And it takes a little, you can't always get there at the early on, but I find that being able to, however you do, like learning to rewrite the story and get your personal power back. And because sexual trauma, I think, is uniquely depletes our personal trauma because it's happens in our creative centers.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's interesting that you point out how when you have experienced trauma, your what do you call it? Rotation or
Yeah, rotation. Yeah.
Yeah, your ability to move gets stuck. Because what's so interesting? Call me crazy, and maybe this is just my intuitive side coming out, but I like doing group fitness classes like 2 or 3 times a week. I go to bar 3. And in the bar 3 classes, they're like packed classes. So sometimes there's like 30 people in there. And it's very interesting to watch the range of motion that some people, or the lack of, that some people have. And I can always tell who has experienced sexual trauma just by looking at their bodies and looking at how they move their body. I'm like, wow, she is so shut down. I like just their physical expression. Like I can see it. It's so easy. Just I start to think I'm like going nuts or something. Like, am I crazy?
No, I'm sure that, and I bet you could I bet I could put numbers to it, like to give it a value. I mean, I do think that there are, that you can absolutely measure that in the body. And I know based on my range of motion assessment and even my energetic assessment with people, when to ask about their histories of sexual trauma and when to ask about suicide ideation, because those show up very specifically.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I totally hear it, because I can tell you, I look at some of these people and I'm like, wow, if I could get them in a room for 5 minutes just to talk to them, like I guarantee you that some of them have experienced some terrible things, or they just have things that they really need to work through that they haven't been able to face yet, or they haven't had the support or whatever. But it's interesting that when you watch people and how they move and really pay attention, you can see it.
Absolutely. And just because we're all human, there are some patterns that go kind of just that are more general as well. For example, the right side of our diaphragms have more muscle mass than the left side, because your liver's over there. It's really big. It's part of just our inherent asymmetry that our heart's a little bit more off to the left.
Yeah.
Liver's on the right. And so your diaphragm is more dense on that side. And so a lot of people will get locked down into right diaphragm dysfunction. So they'll pull down on the right side, and that will like inhibit your left hamstrings, and it causes you to lift your hips from your little hip hiker muscles and skip over your big glutes that should be doing that muscle, which is a huge problem in a bar class because of all the hip stuff that you do and that, and it contributes to having tight hip flexors where people are literally stuck in a fetal position. And so getting just your diaphragm, and so when the diaphragm gets dysfunctional, it flattens out. It goes from being a dome to being more flat. So just doing some exhaling to get the dome to your diaphragm back. And there are some really specific ways to do that breathing to help it target those compensatory neurologic patterns that lay down. But we all have these, we all have these patterns. And then I think beyond the physical piece, that when we're locked down to the right and the earth below us and the solar system above us are all rotating the opposite direction, we're taken out of alignment on a bigger scale, and that you can't access all of your abundance and all of your creativity and all of the amazingness of life when you don't have the ability to move in concert with the bigger picture.
That makes so much sense. Okay, I'm so curious to find out now what techniques you use to help people decompress or heal their vagus nerve. But before you go in there, I know that you have a vagus nerve decompression course that I just watched before we did this. It was awesome. So she teaches you how to test your vagus nerve and gives you like lots of techniques to really feel for it. And I have to say, I think mine's pretty damn healthy.
That doesn't surprise me at all.
Right. Well, both of you guys are like, my range of motion is insane. So yeah. Yeah. Anyway. Okay. So tell us about the techniques and how you work with people. Like, you're in New Orleans, you're where I live. And so you see people locally, but you also see people online, and like, explain how all that works.
Right. So I recorded this course recently for an Australian breast cancer telesummit. And so I've just put my full course out there for everybody. They are largely breathing techniques. They're in specific positions and for each of the compression points. And I do take you through how to evaluate it to see where you are most compressed. Do you want me to describe a technique, or do you want me?
Yeah. So, I mean, just describe for us, like, what so there's movement techniques.
So right. So the course is about movement techniques, really, and particularly related to breath. Beyond what's in the online course, because trauma affects the transverse plane so much, like your rotation, there's also, I have exercises beyond that are about teaching your body that it's safe to rotate and getting that aligned.
So that's a different course, or that's
a different course. That's different material. That's stuff that, I'm doing more on a one-to-one basis. I am putting, I'm gradually getting more and more out there, because I do think that, especially the vagus nerve decompression, to me, I would just love that to be standard public health.
Right. Yeah.
Just for everybody to have that, because whenever you, even if you like helped your friend move furniture and then think you're going to pay for it physically later, or just, if you zig when you should have zagged, or just aren't having a great day, I think these exercises can be really amazing in, just for our very typical or common bumps in the road that we all experience. When I I do work with people in person, and I have packages for long-term work as well, whether I work with somebody, so when I work with somebody in person, we're often doing a lot of, just because I can physically put my hands on them, where I do more of the specific biomechanical assessments, but we peel back the layers, and I have a lot of training in mind-body medicine as well, and we really look at how story and archetype live in the body to get that all aligned. And so we go really deep and get you to ground it in your life and get things to change in amazing ways.
Yeah.
when I work with somebody online, I have an ability to reach through the ethers and feel your physical and energetic alignment with my hands. Like I'll put my hands up to the screen. It's always, my hands are well practiced, so I put it up to my hands, but I can align people with my remote energy skills as well. And then also coach them through the mind body piece, and use and the story piece as well, and really think about what myth are you literally living, and what how can we change that, bring a new story or edit that story so it shows up
Mm-hmm.
differently in your life.
Yeah, that's powerful stuff.
But I am launching a sleep, stress, or I'll say them in the right order: stress, sleep, and sex course, which for 2020. So that's if you are interested in that, you can check that out on my website too.
Yeah, for sure. And definitely check out the vagus nerve decompression course. I'm going to put that in the show notes. And that way you can be on her email list.
Yep. And I'll say one more thing. I am putting together to teach continuing education courses for medical professionals. So if there are medical professionals listening that are interested in getting this as a continuing education course, that is also going to be available in 2020. And there was one other thing I was going to say about, and I have a bunch of live workshops scheduled in New Orleans coming up too. So
awesome. Yay. Y'all need to come to New Orleans.
And I'm happy to take my show on the road if there's interest for that as well.
Yes. Amazing. Well, definitely download her vagus nerve decompression course. Watch that. You'll learn all of the movement techniques and breathing techniques these are self tools. Like I'm all about giving y'all as many tools and practices to build upon and have like this toolbox for transformation that you can have for life. And Melanie gives a great rundown of like how to self-heal around this vagus nerve work. And obviously, you heard her story in the beginning. It was almost like a side effect of your regular PT work that you just started to notice, wow, when we work with a patient in this way, they end up having more pleasure and a better sex drive. And, it's kind of like, oh, that happens too. So definitely try it out. And, you can add this to your toolbox of practices.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Lacey. This has been so much fun.
Yeah. Thanks so much for being on. Wow. Okay. Wait, one more question before we head on. What is one tip or trick that you would give for becoming a multi-orgasmic mama?
Well, I could be very easily hammer down on like decompress, keep your vagus nerve decompressed would probably be the easy answer. But beyond that, I would also say know that pleasure is your birthright. Like really know that deep down. Yeah.
Yeah. Teach your body that. Your body
teach your body that, yeah, you get to really own this. Like you don't have to be the victim of your circumstances here, that you can really experience, you're deeply, deeply wired for pleasure. Yeah.
Right. Even the body's blueprint for women is that we are made to receive pleasure in ways that men aren't at all. Yes. Okay. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for that wonderful tip. You are wired for pleasure. It is your birthright. Please take that and really sit on that and go download your course. All right. Thank you all so much for joining today, and we'll talk to you next week.